The death of a persona and disintegration. A persona is a habitual pattern of thought, words, emotion, and action. For example, the persona of a persona that embodies the coping strategy of a 5-year-old with a predominant emotion of self-pity might be, poor me, no one ever loves me, no one ever wants me, poor me. And as things happen in that environment, the environment of that persona, the child is brushed out of the way. It supports the persona. See, poor me, I've just been brushed out of the way. As people are irritable with the 5-year-old, again, see, poor me. Everyone doesn't understand. Everyone's irritable. Poor me. As the child is stepped on by hurrying adults around, again, the persona is strengthened because the environment is consistently mirroring the persona. And in a persona of poor me for a 5-year-old, eventually the narcissistic and self-centered adults in the environment that induces that persona will say, gee, I guess it is kind of hard for you. We've stepped on you. We've pushed you out of the way. We've had no time. We've interrupted you. We didn't do what we said here. We lied about this. We're sorry. What can we do to make it up to you? At least this is one of the functions of the self-pity persona as a coping mechanism for sociopathic environments for a 5-year-old. And it is important to acknowledge how little of the modern world is designed with a 5-year-old in mind. Meaning the sugars and substances in many of the diets are designed to addict, accelerate adrenals, and create collapse for the 5-year-old. The media rhythm creates an excessive addictive cycle for adrenaline and dopamine, which means that when you enter the presence of a 5-year-old space, there's not enough dopamine and adrenaline to sustain the addiction, so they experience a drug withdrawal, which of course makes them aggravated. And then parents who don't want to deal with the addiction that they've induced by using phones and things as a coping strategy, then give the kid more drugs in the form of sugar or apps or TV, or promises of toys and other newness, more, none of which helps with the underlying issue of presence and connection. None of that is designed with a child's interest or even an understanding of the natural growth cycle of a child. The amount of busyness, the lack of presence in the largely addictive and compulsive adults, addicted to busyness, addicted to money, addicted to porn, addicted to sex, addicted to looking good, addicted to anxiety. None of these are states of presence, which is what a 5-year-old needs to regulate. So the self-pity persona is a very easy persona to sustain. Breaking out of it is somewhat more difficult in this environment because the speed of the cars have not been designed for a 5-year-old. The speed of the media has not been designed for a 5-year-old. The ratio of adults to children has not been designed for a 5-year-old. The 5-year-old is abandoned into kindergarten or a daycare where maybe there's one adult and 12 children. That's not a ratio that's optimal for a 5-year-old who's learning attunement for the first time and doesn't want to learn that attunement from dissociated 5-year-olds, wants to learn that from an attuned and integrated adult. But the child has been marginalized within the paradigm as an unimportant and somewhat inconvenient stage to bring people to the more important and sophisticated consumer age of the young adult. Then you go from being completely ignored and unimportant to being the pivot of every advertising dream to sell and hook you on things that are not, again, designed in what, your best interest. They're designed based on the shame, fear, guilt, etc., and coolness. Look good, don't look like a loser, etc. This is then the pivot point of an economy of overconsumption, which, in order to get the drug of the overconsumption, you've got to what? Abandon the child. That has been conceived in the compulsive overindulgence of a loveless sex in many cases. So how do you then pivot out of the self-pity persona? You can go into bribery and like, I'm so sorry. And this is one of course, the functions of nobody sees me, I'm helpless, is for eventually the narcissism of the parent to be replaced by pity and guilt, and then to transfer and give some effort to buy off the child into a point that they will agree that you are not Satan's offspring or something. You're a parent who's able to do whatever they're doing under the auspices of love and all this for you, and it's hurting you more than it's hurting, all that stuff. You've got to offer an inducement to help the child out of this dynamic. So this is the formation of a persona crystallized by the environment with the possible transmutation and transference of the identity from the self-pity, nothing's right, to finally, this is the bargaining point of the child, if the parent wants to feel like they're actually a human being and the child is behaving like this, and the parent has to some degree acknowledge that at least half of what the child is saying is true, the parent is going to have to offer something up. This is the moment of power in the exchange, and the child will determine what the terms are. No, I don't want to go to the library. Well, but sure, can't we take you to... No, I don't want to go to the library. And what, could we buy you a toy? I don't want any toys. Well, what if we bought you, the most expensive bicycle, and the child thinks, well, that's about the best deal they're going to get. So, it's like, okay, I'll be the happy persona. I'll go back to being the frenetic, addicted, racing around for a time, and then it's not good enough anymore. So you move into a new persona, and it's important to understand the connection between environment and inner persona, because, for example, transmitting out of the self-pity persona and coping strategy into bribery and adrenaline is going to be a very short-term pivot. That's like giving someone with chronic fatigue cocaine. Only a fool looks at that and says, now we're going to have a happy family going forward. No, you're going to get the cocaine high and the cocaine withdrawal, and you're going to be back in worse shape in many cases. And of course, it takes more and more with hedonic adaptation to supply the needs of the malcontent, the addicted, bribed, unrecognized, unhonored self within this body that's getting fried from all of this volatility. And of course, the advertisers have no interest in any of this. They are simply telling parents and telling children to tell their parents that if they want to be called parents and good parents, they will buy the Nikes, they will buy the video games, etc. And so here's this pivot. The pivot into actually attuning into the presence of the child, which is a state of deep innocence in many cases, where the personas are much more liquid and spontaneous. It's a more difficult journey. It's understanding the amount of shock or shame that goes through a child when you yell, don't run into the street, don't run into the street. And you realize, I'm going to be yelling this for the next 10 years, as long as we live on a street with 40-mile-an-hour cars passing right by the front in a sociopathic country. I might actually have to move to a house that was designed with children in mind, which means they've got an enclosed buffer area, or better still, a community where the cars come in and park in the parking lot and then people walk, and that children can wander the community without this life-threatening trauma hanging over their head, because the community has actually been designed with safety, with low adrenals in mind. Oh, I don't want to have to move to a community like that. I just want to be called a great parent living in a crappy community. And we don't want to redesign our cities to, what, go slower? No, we're wasting push this stuff out of mind. So the actual attuning to the developmental cycle of a child, we may have to clear our PTSD. We don't want to do that. We might have to look at our cultural shadow. We don't want to look at that. We might want to have to look at our architect. We don't want to look at that. We might want to look at the adult-to-child. No, we don't want to look at that. We might want to look at both working parents. We don't want to look at that. We might want to look at a maternity leave. No, we don't want to look at that. We might want to look at no. We want to do what we want when we want, in the way that we want. No one's going to tell us up to. We don't want to be in some community where we have to discuss things. We're Americans. We do what we want. And so we're not going to do it that way. But maybe if we buy a better popsicle, a cuter pink bicycle with training wheels before the other parents on the street, then we can, see how sort of good parents we are. We may be shitty, kind of vacant people that leave you with traumatized teenagers to look after. But look, we got you the pink bicycle faster than anyone else. We've got the batteries, and it's the iPad. Show your friends what we bought you. We're good parents, right? It's an easier fix. And you have the persona in the parent, of course, that if they can induce a certain level of smile and stuff on their child, and my mother always used to work very hard to try and get validation that she was a good parent in any way possible without actually being a good parent. So step one was, she could be in her delusions of that without being interrupted. So this was one level of accomplishment, that we weren't actively telling her that she's terrible. And so, of course, she'd have to supply a certain number of objects so that she could be off in her fantasy land without interruption. And then the next option would be to actually be a bit of the fantasy, to smile or say some nice things. And then, and finally to, if she went all out and bribed in every particular way, maybe we would tell her that it wasn't her fault, and, it really didn't matter that she had PTSD, and it really didn't matter that she didn't have feelings, and we couldn't have asked for a nicer mother, and a little bit of peace, inside the frustration, the fear of the regressed adult child. So this is the fragility and kind of the structure of persona. It's a habit. It is a sustainable habit. What that means is that the environment reinforces it. For example, the self-pity regressed, wounded child is a terrifically sustainable persona in most Western homes because there is so much validation. You look through that lens, I'm not the most important one. Yes, almost in all cases, the only time I'm really important is when mom and dad need to use me to feel good about themselves. So they've got to get me to do and say certain things, and they've got to get me to go to this expensive school that I hate, so that they can say that they sent us to an expensive school that we hated. And so they've got to do this. And so they need that. But other than that, it's like, well, just go away and don't exist because we want to maintain our fantasy world. And so it's incredibly easy. It's very difficult once you've experienced, over a decade of narcissistic, sociopathic adults using you for their fixes, their drugs, and then discarding you when you're in the way of their high, and shaming and dumping and punishing you when you come between them and their drug, be it adrenaline, be it compulsively looking good, be it their sugar, be it their lies, whatever the drug of the day is. When you come between them and their lies consistently, particularly in going in withdrawal phase and getting beaten and violated, it's very hard to get out of the self-pity thing because there's so much story and weight. And then all the adults around that are watching, that are accommodating the abuser at the expense of the child. Oh, I wouldn't want to be arguing with Dane's parents right now. No, let's just let him be beaten because they are in a temper right now, and we don't want to interfere with how other parents parent their children, do we? So let's just, make the betrayal ubiquitous, completely surrounding the child, where a child will never see a single adult say, that's not right. You can't do that to a 6-year-old boy. No, you'll surround that child with seeing parents that talk about, oh my goodness, these terrible children. Oh, what they're doing to our health. Oh, I don't know if I'm going to make it. I beat that 6-year-old again, and it's killing me. It's killing me. And of course, the child realizes they're not saying it's bothering them that they beat you. They're so self-centered and narcissistic that the effort to beat an infant is just too much for these adult parents, or these adult children in the guise of parents. So it's very difficult to break out of that role. But it is possible to shatter a persona and take it into deeper psychosis and trauma. You have the scared, frightened child, and this is where you have the truly narcissistic parent who doesn't want to be seen in the reality of their impact. When you have cowering children, the message to anyone watching, including the abuser, is that they might be doing something wrong. They might be inappropriate. Now, how do you shatter this? So you have the poor me, nobody ever pays attention to me, da-da-da-da-da. Well, occasionally you get someone who's so narcissistic and abusive that this is not okay. And they are not going to have you be a reflection on their impact. And this is where you take it to the next level. How dare you? How dare you do? And you gesture violently. And if the child is still in their self-pity, the parent may escalate it again. Hit him. Hit a 6-year-old boy with, in a sense, the equivalent of having you hit by a 30-foot giant. A 30-foot giant comes into the room raging as usual, and you run for cover. And And the giant says, "How dare you be ungrateful? I could have stepped on you yesterday. I did," and whacks you over the head with a a board that's 12 feet long and 4 feet thick. It's like, wow. And don't you cry, and you can actually, what happens is the violence escalates to a point where the self-pity, which is kind of inward, is shattered, because it's no longer effective. It is a shattered persona. It's a mask that's between the raw pain and the self. And so you have now a shattered persona, where what happens is a louder voice comes into the inner psyche, and it says, you are with a mad man. You are with an insane sociopath. You cannot afford to feel self-pity because it's not fast and dynamic enough to keep you alive in this situation. You've got to take your cue from the sociopath, or you may be dead. So now the self-pity shatters, and you have a new persona, a new pattern of thought, feeling, interaction. So Dad seems to be reacting to the cowering. Okay, we cannot afford to do that. Okay, no more cowering. Yes, sir. No, sir. What do you need? Okay, that's better, son. That's more like it. Now, don't make me hit you again, you see? So this high alert, high trauma, high adrenal persona can stay there long enough for the violence to subside. Now, the child has to completely dissociate from their fear, from their panic, from their shame, from their rage, from the hatred, from the hurt, because that has no place in the fantasy of the narcissistic father. And when all feelings are banished, with pain of beating, trauma, and death, with pain of hatred, how dare you ruin my life? There's a complete dissociation. I have no feelings. No, I'm fine. You see, the father that can induce this in his boy and then move on as if nothing has happened. The neighborhood of parents who heard this tirade and not a single one stepped in to protect the child. They've all communicated something very clear. You go into your emotions and you're dead. And not one of us will step in to protect you. Because you're not that important. Your feminine self, your emotions are not that important. You're nothing. Now, a child that must accept that reality in order to survive has just been turned into a human being in a sociopathic state. Because the sociopathic state of dissociated human emotions, of fight, flight, freeze, of strategic reactions, is not a feminine self. It's not a human self. This is a 200 million year old crocodile brain, learning what it needs to do to survive with alacrity and precision. Now, the brain is an integrity creating machine. As soon as that 6-year-old boy realizes that his feelings mean nothing to a single adult in his entire reality, that his feelings are always less valuable than his parents' needs and addictions, that boy develops a coping mechanism to dissociate from every emotion at the drop of a hat, and learns that it's safer and less painful and less humiliating and less filled with panic and confusion, to be completely removed from those feelings. And the boy who survives in the dissociative or sociopathic persona induced by the abusive environment is the boy that identifies and says, this is me. You see, in a healthy environment, emotions are changing constantly. They're being expressed constantly. People are responding constantly to each other's feelings. And in a healthy environment where 1 hour you're happy, the next hour you're sad, the next hour you're filled with joy, the next hour is grief, the next hour it's wonder and surprise. In that kind of healthy fluidity, one does not say, I am rage, I am shame, I am a bad person. One says, I am the witness who is witnessing. I can't possibly be anger because now I'm feeling joy. I can't possibly be joy because, this thing made me mad. And these people can't possibly believe that I have no value because when I said I was mad, they changed. They listened. When I said I was sad, they comforted me. So I do matter. And if I matter, so do you, so do other people's feelings. You see, the brain is an integrity-making machine. And I matter because I'm a human being, not because I have a stick that's going to beat people if they don't do what I say. And I've got to threaten them with a stick because nobody cares in this world. And I'm never going to be safe from these abusers until I get my own stick that's big enough to fight back. So we're not talking about love. We're not talking about humanity. We're not talking about empathy. We're talking about war and power dynamics, which are the region and the domain of the reptilian brain. Fight, flight, freeze. If someone fights and you don't have the power, you run. You don't say, in the reptilian brain, which is the brain induced by a sociopathic environment, you don't say, this hurts me, Dad. Why are you doing it? How dare you speak to your father? You say, oh, I guess I don't exist. I guess there is no place for me. And I guess the only way I'll make sense of that, now that I'm dissociated from all my empathy and my feelings, is that when I get old enough to have a little helpless 6-year-old, I will beat the shit out of them. Just following the instinctual pattern. There's no feeling. Oh, this is what it feels like to be a parent. I see. Well, matches the system. Check. Congruency. Intergenerational. You can shatter a persona with violence. You can shatter a persona with trauma. And in that liquidity, where you induce the sociopathic reckoning, what do I have to do here to survive? You can set a template in place in a child. It says, pay attention to me and not yourself. Pay attention to my lies and not your truth. Don't have feelings. I don't want them. I don't want the evidence. I don't want the finger pointed at me. Don't have feelings. And join me in hating the part of you that reminds me of me. And together we'll gang up on the feminine self. So when you get to be big and strong like me, you can go around tormenting women like I do. Because we're not talking about love here. We're talking about an epic, chronic, socially institutionalized culture of chauvinism and bullying. Oh, and you can learn to be spiritual and healthy and all that. Go take the workshops, read the books. There's just one problem. You're going to have to go into an ocean of grief, and you've never learned to regulate your emotions because I shut them off for you too fast before you could learn. Because I had no emotions there for you to bounce off of. Because I hit you when you elicited my helplessness. So you don't know how to steer in these titanic waves. You don't know what's going on because you were told this was love. You were told that he was perfect. You don't know what's going on. And in this level of dissociated hate, rage, and sociopathic behavior, you can mentally grasp the picture, I'm a bad person. People say you shouldn't rage and be violent and hit children. That's the new fad these days. I don't know. It's just what I do. I guess I'm a bad person. And that just numbs all those feelings down to a deeper level. You collapse someone's persona, their habit of coping with thought, feeling, action, etc., when you direct too many people's energy and emotional intensity at them in an environment that is so sociopathic that their human needs to survive, feel secure in that survival, and emotionally belong, are not honored, which induces them to do what is necessary to survive in that environment, keep secrets about the shadow side that the culture doesn't want to see. Because when you keep the secret of the bad part in you, what you're also doing is keeping the secret of the cult that raises people like this and pretends it's wonderful. You see, in order for the cult to continue unchallenged, you have to put Mr. Happy Face on top of all of these programs. You see how happy we all are? Isn't this a happy family? Isn't this wonderful? Oh, good. Good. I'm glad we're all in agreement about that. We're the best. We're wonderful. We're Americans, greatest country in the world. Aren't we great? You have to maintain that. It requires millions of people to shut up about their abuses of others and the abuses that were done to them, and to play the scripts. And the cult, like all cults, which resists change, every cult is there for one reason: to protect its members from the unknown. And why is the unknown the most devastating and terrifying thing for every human being in a traumatized culture? Because the unknown risks exposing you to the vulnerability of re-traumatization. And certainty, the devil you know, is your one guard that you're not going to just accidentally stumble into that helpless, overwhelming place of emotion that most people would do anything to avoid.